Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. Keeping up with all the changes in the Elder Scrolls Online can be difficult at times, and that's putting it mildly. The public test server comes out, we get tons of changes, then on top of that, each week that goes by before the DLC releases, they do more tweaks and changes on the test server. So I put this video together here to sum up all of the important stuff that you need to know for combat with the High Isle chapter so that you don't miss a beat. So we'll start off by going through the class changes, and then we'll cover the gear, the new sets coming that will be worth picking up, as well as changes to existing gear sets. We'll do a quick rundown of the champion point system changes, and then finally some miscellaneous combat and gameplay changes. This video won't be focused on stuff outside of combat like the new card game, and it also won't be super in-depth on each topic. The goal of this is instead to give an overview of what I think are the important details that you'll need to account for when the patch goes live. Some of these changes I've already done some more detailed analysis on here on YouTube, so I'll make sure to point that out in the appropriate sections if you're looking to dig a little deeper into some of these particular topics. And as a heads up, I will have the build section of my website all updated when the High Isle patch goes live, so if you're looking to get your character set up when the patch hits, definitely make sure to check that out. And I also added some new charts on penetration and crit damage to help you reach the caps for those in group settings as well as on the trial dummy. So those will be listed and kept up to date for each new patch under the Helpful Resources tab. And lastly, before we get started, huge thank you to those that have supported already as Patreon or YouTube members. It really does help a ton to keep this all going. And just hitting that sub button also helps a ton, so thank you to those who have subscribed to the channel. We're going to be doing a huge 50k crown giveaway whenever we hit 50k subs here on YouTube, so I'll give more news about that as we get a little closer. But with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. So first up, we'll go through some of the important class changes. We'll start with the Dragonknight. So Engulfing Flames, they reduced the flame damage taken bonus on this morph to a maximum of 6%, down from 10%. So this will be a nerf for all classes, but definitely hits the Dragonknight a little bit harder since they have so many skills that deal flame damage. Another nerf is to Burning Embers, reduce the healing value from this morph to up to 50%, down from up to 100%. Still should be a pretty solid, reliable heal for PvE. I'm not sure how good of a heal it's going to be for PvP now. The next nerf is to Combustion. This passive now has a cooldown of 3 seconds, up from 0.5 seconds. So this will be a pretty noticeable sustained nerf for DKs, especially in AoE heavy situations. The main impacts of this, I think, for PvE will be having a tougher time spamming Talons and Deep Breath over longer AoE encounters, and Stam DK will likely have a tougher time sustaining Whip as their main spammable. For a bit more in-depth look at this, I did cover it in the Week 4 PTS patch notes video. That's linked in the description if you want to dig a little deeper into that change. The next change is with Hardened Armor. Increased the damage shield granted from this morph by 24%. So this is a nice little buff. The tooltip on this skill now is even with Bone Shield. So now alongside of Igneous Shield, DKs have some pretty nice class shields in their kit. And speaking of Igneous Shield, the other morph of that, Fragmented Shield, was buffed a little to have a bit longer duration on the Major Mending. So that will now last 8 seconds with the Eternal Mountain passive maxed out. And then finally, Coagulating Blood lost its cost reduction, so it will be a little more expensive to cast now, but is up to 50% additional healing now instead of 33%. Overall, DK's definitely got more nerfs than buffs, and were hit the hardest of all the classes going into High Isle. I still think they'll be very good, but you likely won't see them overperforming to the level that they were in the Ascending Tide DLC. Next up, we have the Necromancer. Mystic Siphon. This morph now increases your health, magicka, and stamina recovery by up to 150 while it's active, rather than restoring up to 1260 magicka over its duration. So after percent bonuses that boost your recoveries, you're going to be getting about the same magicka back with this skill, but now you'll also get stamina and health to go along with it. So this is a pretty nice change here, especially for those necros wearing Spalder of Ruin. That takes your recoveries down pretty low in trial settings, so this will help to offset that a bit. Next up, the change to Beckoning Armor. This morph now attempts to pull valid targets once every 2 seconds, up from every 3. So a little buff there for necro tanks. And then this one is really juicy, Ruinous Scythe. This morph now deals bleed damage rather than physical. This morph now applies the hemorrhaging status effect on damage dealt. This morph now sets all enemies off balance on hit rather than every third cast. So now we have instant on-demand off balance here, and this will pair really well with the new exploiter node in the champion point tree, which we'll cover a little bit later. Also, the guaranteed hemorrhaging is really nice. This makes this a very attractive AoE spammable option now, and I think it may even give silver Silver Shards, a run for its money for situations where you want to slot an AoE spammable for boss fights. And it does have a heal on it too, so for solo play or group play with no healers, this skill is absolutely cracked now. And the last change is with Mortal Coil. This morph now restores up to 1020 magicka and stamina over its duration, with its restore happening in increments of 2 seconds. So this previously only restored stamina, so now if you happen to be running this, a little boost to what you'll get back here. So overall, nothing but buffs really for Necromancers. I see them being very popular options for all roles in the High Isle patch. Next up, we have the Nightblade. Piercing Mark had its duration increased to 60 seconds, up from 30 seconds. And then Ambush, this is the opposite morph of Lotus Fan. They increased the duration of the Empower granted from this morph to 10 seconds, up from 3 seconds. And this morph also grants minor Berserk for the duration as well. So a few little buffs there to Ambush to make it a little more enticing. Refreshing Path, this is the opposite morph of Twisting Path, the healing morph. It now grants minor Endurance and Intellect for 4 seconds each tick. This is a really nice buff for Nightblade supports that are using this heal. You don't really get these buffs in too many places, so it's good to have a nice reliable source for these. Next up is Drain Power. Increase the duration of Major Brutality and Sorcery granted from this ability in its morphs to 30 seconds, up from 20, to make up for the fact that they required a target to gain these effects. And then Power Extraction now grants the caster minor courage for 30 seconds upon dealing damage. So pretty cool theme here, I think, with this morph. It really fits the name well of extracting the power from the enemy. Instead of just lowering the enemy's damage by 215 with minor cowardice, you now also increase yours by 215 too with minor courage. So it just really fits the theme of the Nightblade well, I think. Obviously a bit redundant for groups running this buff already, but could be really nice outside of that. I like the stark differences in the two morph options now. So overall, like the Necros, pretty much only buffs here for Nightblade as well. Next up, we have the Sorcerer. Crystal Fragments. This morph now activates off any non-ultimate active ability cast rather than only magicka costing abilities, and reduced the proc chance to 33% down from 35%. So the small nerf to the proc chance is not really a big deal. It's a very small change, probably won't even be noticeable, but this now proccing from stamina or health costing skills on top of magicka costing skills, that's pretty nice. This opens up the door for magicka sorcerers to finally use the Vampire Blood for Blood skill and get the full effect from it. And it's also nice if you're using bound armament, since that costs stamina, so every time you hit it previously you wouldn't get a chance to proc your frags. Well, now when you cast bound armaments or any other skill, you'll have that same 33% chance to proc them. So pretty nice change overall. I would be more excited for this if it wasn't for the other morph here, Crystal Weapon, getting an even bigger buff. So this one now causes your next 2 light or heavy attacks to deal bonus damage up from 1. This is really insane for damage now. You pretty much have to change your rotation up to alternate this ability with every other cast, and then you essentially just have a spammable firing at all times in your rotation. It's super strong. They did increase the base cost to $34.43 up from $22.95 to account for the fact that you're capable of getting off 2 casts of the ability for the price of 1. And then they also increased the duration of the skill to 6 seconds up from 4. So it will be pretty rough on sustain, no doubt about that, but it is still very strong, and will put Stamsorks at the top of the pecking order for single target DPS for the High Isle patch. If you haven't already seen it, make sure to check out Luca Cash's Stamsork parse for High Isle. I'll have it linked down in the description. Really insane DPS levels right now though. Next up is Summon Charged Atronach. This morph's area of effect damage now always applies the concussed status effect. So this is the morph that does not see much use, and while I'm glad they are giving it some attention, I don't think this is going to be something that will sway people to use it over the more common Greater Storm Atro morph. And then finally, Endless Fury. They reduced the cost of this skill down to $21.60 from $24.30 to help reinforce the idea that you are able to endlessly cast it. I'd like to see even more differences in the two morphs of this ability, to be honest. They feel too much like the same ability to me. I think they could get really creative here and help the two morphs stand out apart from each other more, but either way, nice bit of cost reduction here for those that are using this morph. Next up, we have Templars. Blazing Shield increased the radius of this morph to 8 meters, up from 6, to better match its visual effects. So a little buff there for the size on this one. Then Backlash increased the cost of this ability and the Purifying Light morph to $21.60, up from $2,000. Power of the Light reduced the cost of this morph to $13.37, down from $1,700. So this one I really don't understand. Stamplars have really great sustain in PvE, and Magplars have awful sustain. I would have preferred to see this one go the opposite route, I think. So I don't know. This one was just a little bit weird to me. Next up, we have Living Dark. The heal no longer scales with stats and instead heals for a base of 2,000 health when it triggers. So a pretty hefty nerf to the heal here for those using for solo play or PvP. They did give it a few buffs to compensate. They increased the duration to 10 seconds up from 4 and reduced the cost down to 40.50 from 43.20. And then Dark Flare also received a little cost reduction down to 24.30. This one was previously 2,700. I think they've been slowly trying to make this a more appealing ranged spammable option, but without it proccing Burning Light, it's just such a big DPS loss over using your Puncturing Sweep or jabs. And then finally, the Practice Incantation Ultimate. This morph now allows you to move at a reduced rate while channeling it, rather than being unable to move at all. So overall, I think Magicka Templars still need a little love for PvE DPS. Overall, Templars did get a few buffs here, but none that will really impact that side of things. And finally, for the classes, we have Warden. The Wild Guardian Ultimate. This morph now deals 10% more damage, up from 5%, to ensure it deals similar damage to Eternal Guardian when you take the Piercing Magic passive. So this has been a long time complaint that the morph that is supposed to deal more damage actually deals less because of this class passive. So it's nice to see that they evened that out there, and then they also converted the damage to bleed damage instead of physical, and each attack applies the hemorrhaging status effect. So really juicy buffs for this skill now. With that guaranteed bleed, it's going to be a pretty significant DPS increase over the old version. But now they kind of just flip-flopped the old problem, and everyone will just run this morph now and drop the old one. I think the ideal solution would be to give the Magicka morph some kind of support buff or debuff to go with it, and then you'd have a nice choice between a group support option or a higher damage option. Next up is Deep Fissure. This morph now also applies Minor Breach to enemies hit for the duration. This is actually pretty nice. On-demand AoE Major and Minor Breach for 10 seconds from one skill. I think this will be really nice to have on a support Warden to precast running into trash encounters, and possibly on some other boss encounters as well, where the tank can't reliably keep up both Major and Minor Breach on all of the targets. DPS will still get more from the Subterranean Assault morph, but definitely will be nice to have someone run this for the group. Next up is Corrupting Pollen. This morph now applies Minor Cowardice to enemies in the area to help it gain some viability in PvE areas. This is really cool too. Previously, it only gave Major Defile to enemies in the area, which is pretty useless in PvE. But on-demand Minor Cowardice that can easily be slotted by a support, that could be pretty nice for taking some pressure off the incoming damage that the group is taking from a particular enemy or attack. Next up is the Crystallized Slab morph. This morph now also stuns the target upon dealing damage. I'd imagine this morph gets way less use than Shimmering Shield, since Major Heroism is just such a strong buff to give yourself. I guess this makes it a little more enticing now for PvP, but I don't know. I still think the Major Heroism will be the more desirable side effect. So next up we have Expansive Frost Cloak. They expanded the radius of this morph to 36 meters, up from 28. So this is really huge now. Reddit user Mr. Stack put this little visualization together, comparing it up against some other common abilities like Echoing Vigor and Combat Prayer, just to see how large the 36 meters really is. So yeah, it's pretty big. So nice little buff to this skill here. And then finally, Northern Storm. This morph now grants 300 weapon and spell damage for up to 30 seconds after casting, rather than up to 15% max magicka for 30 seconds. So is this a nerf or a buff? So damage-wise, for most magicka stacking setups, this will probably leave you in a pretty similar spot, and possibly even a slight nerf for those heavily invested into magicka stacking. But now this makes it possible to run for both magicka and stamina stacking setups. For PvE DPS, it is really hard to get away from the bear for single target and Destro ults for AoE trash encounters though, so we'll see if this can work its way into some setups. Overall though, lots of really nice buffs for the Warden here. I think they did a pretty good job. Definitely would like to see the Eternal Guardian Bear morph get a little more utility added to it, but for the most part there are some pretty good changes here. I have heard a lot of people complaining about the state of Magicka Wardens. I think the hybridization stuff kind of killed off a lot of the reason to go the Magicka route on a Warden, so hopefully they can do something to address those concerns as well. I will say a Frost Warden does still seem like a very fun, viable route for those that want to go with that more niche playstyle. And that'll wrap up the class changes. Overall, mostly buffs all around. DKs were really the one that got the majority of the nerfs, so we'll see where they stack up against everything else once that High Isle patch goes live. Alright, moving on now. This next section will cover the gear sets, both the new options that will be introduced that I think will be worth grabbing, as well as relevant changes to the existing gear sets. We'll start off with the incoming sets that I think will be worth grabbing as a DPS. Order's Wrath is a craftable set, Whirl of the Depths is a light set from the new trial, and Coral Riptide is a medium set from the new trial. So as a DPS, these are the 3 5-piece sets that you'll want to be on the lookout for. Order's Wrath is going to be the new go-to craftable option for DPS. Really solid stats all around, and it has a unique crit damage bonus that can stack with other bonuses like Minor Force. This one is going to be very popular. Whirl of the Depths is a nice proc set that deals frost damage. Comparing to a set like Reliquin, the single target DPS on this is a little bit lower, but Whirl has the advantage of dealing AoE damage. And that AoE damage is pretty strong, but that portion of it is only up for 6 seconds out of every 18 seconds, and it is in a static spot on the ground. So if the target moves out of it right after it drops, it's going to be a pretty big damage loss. So I think this one will be really great on relatively stationary encounters that do call for a little more cleave damage, but for stuff with a lot of movement, you will likely be a bit disappointed with the results. And then Coral Riptide is a medium armor counterpart to Basai's Mania. This one works in a very similar way, except that it increases your weapon and spell damage instead of giving you a % damage boost. The nice thing about this, and something they changed due to feedback, was allowing this set to cap out at 33% stamina remaining instead of requiring you to take your stam all the way down to max out the bonus like you do with Basai. Missing stamina is way more risky than missing magicka, so to have a pretty similar damage boost with way more risk involved, it just didn't make this set very enticing, but thankfully they adjusted it to cap out sooner, and now even in the 50 to 60% stamina remaining range, this is a really strong set. So you don't have to get too crazy sweaty with it to get good results. Anything around that 50% stamina mark, and this is already pushing to be one of the best sets in the game. So this will pair perfectly also with the Martial Knowledge set for whoever is in charge of running that, since you'll have to constantly be having your stamina under 50% to keep that buff up. You'll already be in the range you need to be, and this will be a great option there. But even outside of that, I think it's going to be good too. One thing I really love about this set, along with the other two options, they really help to fill in some of the gaps for the types of sets that we were missing for PvE DPS. So now we just have more options at our disposal to help with different sorts of builds and scenarios. Moving on from DPS over to the support set options, we also have a crafted set and 2 trial sets. Serpent's Disdain is the craftable option, Pillager's Prophet is a light armor set from the new trial, and Pearlescent Ward is a heavy armor set from the new trial. The craftable option here, Serpent's Disdain, is a little more niche for PvE than like Order's Wrath will be for DPS. You know, it doesn't quite hold up to some of the more traditional set options that we have, but what it does do is allow someone that may be a little newer to the support role, maybe they're in charge of minor brittle. So with this set, you'd be able to get really great uptimes pretty easy on whatever status effects that you need to keep up. And it's also easy to backbar it. You could have Frost Reach slotted on your backbar Ice Staff, and with one cast, you have 16 seconds of uptime on minor maim and minor brittle. Again, probably not going to enter in the scene as a meta support option, but definitely an interesting new idea for a set, and I think it could be a centerpiece for some pretty fun builds. The next 2 trial sets I think will be very commonly used by support. First up is Pillager's Prophet. So essentially the way this works is you give your group ultimate based on how much ultimate you spend when you cast your ult. So the higher you save up, the more ultimate goes to your group. So let's say you pop a Warhorn just a bit after it comes up, let's say 260 ultimate spent. 5% of that is 13 ultimate. So every 2 seconds, you'll give the group 13 ultimate for a total of 65 ult back. Not too bad at all. It does cap out at 20 ult per tick, meaning that 400 ultimate is the most that you can save up and still benefit from spending it. But at that point, you're giving your group 100 ultimate, which is pretty nuts. And you can only do this once every 45 seconds. So you couldn't run some crazy ult gen builds and pump them out quicker than the 45-second mark. So you do still have that hard limit there. The original design of this had all of the ultimate come out at once instead of scattered over 10 seconds. And this could be nice, but it could also really suck when you were about to cast your ultimate and then you get this giant burst of ult, which would essentially just be wasted then. Well, now if something like that happens, you'll still get several ticks of the ultimate back. You may waste 1 or 2 ticks if you don't time it right, but it won't be a complete waste like in that other scenario. Really great set all around though. I think it will be a staple for most trial groups. And then the heavy armor set Pearlescent Ward is also really good. Both of these are some of my favorite support sets that they've put out in a while. I won't get too crazy in depth into this. The Tank Club's YouTube channel has a video that dives a little deeper into it if you want to check that out. But essentially the way this set works is that when everyone is alive, you get 180 weapon and spell damage for everyone in the group. And depending on how many are in your group, every dead party member will reduce that amount by 1% and convert it into damage reduction for the group, up to 66% reduction for the last person standing. This is such a great option for progression groups. The damage you get is on the lower side compared to some support sets, but it does still give your group a DPS gain, and it's only 35 weapon and spell damage lower than something like Yolnahkrin's Minor Courage. But the damage reduction is going to be insanely useful for recovering from near wipe situations. If you notice, there is a special wording as well that has been added to this and some other sets that operate similarly, where the set still works if the wearer is dead. So if the tank that's wearing this set goes down, the group still benefits from that extra damage reduction. Overall, I really like the set, and I think it will be pretty heavily used. All 4 of the trial sets this year are very enticing. I think they did the best job they've done in a long time with the set designs, especially those trial ones, but the crafted ones are pretty fun too. And we definitely can't forget the mythics. I think all 5 of those will have some use also. I won't go too much into the Dovra Sabatons and Left-Hander's Aegis belt. These are both pretty cool, but I don't see them being super PvE relevant. So we'll skip ahead and go to the 3 that I'll be aiming to grab as quickly as possible once the patch drops. So these 3 are Mora's Whispers, Sea Serpent's Coil, and Oaken Soul. I think all 3 of these will be very nice options for different kinds of scenarios and builds for PvE. Not that they won't be good outside of that too, but I'm going to stick to covering them from a PvE angle. So let's start with Mora's Whispers. This one does require you to get 297 lore books to max out the bonus on it, but once you do, you have all of that extra XP gain and the nice 7% extra crit chance. It is a lot of books to collect, but the good thing is if you've already collected them to get your Mages Guild up to rank 10, then you've done most of the work already. So for me personally, I think what I'll probably do is only use this on characters that have already done the Mages Guild grind, and that way I can finish it off pretty easily. And characters that haven't, I'll probably hold off on it. But looking at this from a damage perspective, it won't be quite as hard hitting as the kilt, but it is just a flat amount of crit chance that never goes up or down. It doesn't require any kind of micromanagement, so definitely some appeal to it from that perspective. I think this will be the perfect set it and forget it mythic option. Sea Serpent's Coil is also super appealing. This will be a great inverse of the kilt where you want to be consistently taking damage rather than avoiding it. Major Courage is a bit redundant for group play, but if you are highly coordinated and know all of your DPS are running this for a specific fight, you could drop your Major Courage set for something else and get an extra benefit in the group. And then that Major Berserk is just a great buff as well. Often you'll get this from Kinra's, but that just frees up a 5-piece set to run a different option and you still get the Major Berserk buff. It does have a pretty nasty 40% snare that it puts on you, but for more stationary encounters, this won't really matter that much. Might not want to run this for trash encounters leading up to the boss though, or you might be super slow. And then finally for the mythics, we have the Oaken Soul Ring. This thing is absolutely loaded with buffs at the cost of only being able to use 1 bar in your build. For group play, many of the buffs will be redundant, but not all of them, and some you wouldn't have perfect uptimes on anyways. The Major Heroism is especially attractive, as that's not an easy buff to come by, and it grants a ton of extra ult gain. So even for group play, I think this could be a pretty strong option, though in organized scenarios, it should still underperform compared to 2-bar builds. For more unorganized groups though, and especially for solo, man, this thing is crazy. It is just so loaded with buffs. Who needs a back bar when you have all of this stuff on it? I think you all should just look at it for what it is and enjoy the uniqueness that it offers for the High Isle patch. I personally doubt it's gonna stay this way for long beyond that, but who knows? I've definitely been wrong about stuff like that before. So that pretty much covers all the new sets. To sum it up, for PvE purposes, Order's Wrath, Whirl of the Depths, and Coral Riptide are going to be the 5-piece sets to go after as a DPS. Pillager's Prophet and Pearlescent Ward are the main ones to pick up for support roles, with Serpent's Disdain being an interesting niche option as well. And then Mora's Whispers, Sea Serpent's Coil, and Oaken Soul being the main 3 mythics that will be relevant for PvE. But we also had some changes to the existing item sets. Not a ton, but a few that were definitely worth mentioning. So Dragonknight's Grip got a bit of a rework. This set now increases all of your damage done by 330 and reduces your healing taken by 10%, rather than causing your direct damage attacks to cause enemies to take 617 more damage from your attacks for 6 seconds once every 9 seconds. So now we have 100% uptime instead of 66% uptime, and now all of our abilities will gain this benefit, not just abilities against a specific target. So for pure single target damage, this looks like a slight nerf, but a pretty nice buff to the set for AoE damage. However, it does now have that curse to go with it as well, the 10% reduced healing taken. For most content, this probably isn't that bad, but definitely going to be noticeable and perhaps inadvisable for some scenarios. It isn't a super popular PvE option right now anyway, so I don't expect it to matter that much on that side of things, but still an interesting change, and I thought it was definitely worth bringing up. Next up is Maarselok. This set now dynamically scales with the higher of your weapon or spell damage rather than only your weapon damage. The damage from this set now increases by 10% per negative effect, up from 2%, but has a cap of 300% rather than no cap. This is definitely a buff to the set, but still requires a medium or a heavy attack to activate it, which can feel awkward doing every 10 seconds in a rotation. I really wish they would make the condition a bash or a heavy attack instead of only a heavy to open up the door for more different kinds of playstyles. But it is what it is. It's not as awful as it has been in the last several patches, but I probably still won't use it due to the heavy attack condition. Next up, we have Tremor Scale. This is one of my favorite changes for sure. They increased the duration of this set to 15 seconds, up from 8, increased the cooldown to 10 seconds, up from 10. So instead of an 8-second duration with an 8-second cooldown, it's a 15-second duration with a 10-second cooldown. So it should be very easy to keep up at all times. Whereas before, due to the delay in the proc after the taunt, you actually couldn't keep it up at 100%. Then they also changed it to reduce the armor of the enemy by 8% of the higher of your physical or spell resistance, rather than reducing it by a flat 2395. So at 30k armor, this will be 2400 extra penetration for everyone in the group, or 2640 at 33k armor. Pretty great change all around, and makes this a much more reliable option now. And this, now paired with Crimson Oath, can give you very similar results to what you'd get from Alkosh, with pretty easy conditions for keeping the armor shred going. So the next change is to the set Zon. The base damage was lowered a lot, but with it lasting 10 seconds now, it ramps up pretty dang high by the end of it. Unfortunately, it still can't critically strike, and having a 33% chance to proc from a critical light or heavy attack now instead of just the light or heavy, it makes it even more RNG heavy than it used to be to actually get it to go off. The AoE aspect that they added in is actually pretty cool. It makes sense that the beam would deal AoE damage, more similar to how the beam on the actual encounter against Zon deals damage to anyone touching it, but it isn't going to be reliable enough, I think, for trash encounters, unless maybe you are doing a heavy attack lightning build. And then for bosses, maybe there are select ones where this could do all right on, and the tether would add in some needed cleave damage. But I think the RNG on top of RNG is what really hurts the new idea in design. Other than that, I think I do like it slightly better than the old version, but it still needs some tweaks in my opinion. And then finally, for the item set changes that we will cover here, Harpooner's Waiting Kilt did get nerfed down a little bit. The duration of the stacks granted from this set is now 20 seconds, down from a minute. So you won't be able to hold those for quite as long between encounters like you used to, but should be able to still keep them up fine in the same way within most fights. They also reduced the critical chance granted down to 110 from 125 per stack. This doesn't really matter that much. It's only 0.6% less crit chance at max stacks. This is still going to be a very strong option. I think it will be popular still for many trial encounters. All right, moving on, we'll cover the champion points. This will be a very brief run through. I did a video already diving a bit deeper into this if you want to check that out. I think that video will be very helpful for figuring out how to set up your champion points as a damage dealer. But for a quick rundown of the changes, we did get 2 new champion point nodes in the warfare tree under the Extended Might constellation. Exploiter increases your damage done against off-balance enemies by 10%, and Force of Nature increases your offensive penetration by 900 for each status effect your target has. Both of these are going to be pretty nice situationally. And then they also buffed a few of the existing nodes as well. So Occult Overload got buffed up to 12,800 Oblivion damage. It seems kind of nice for PvP, but for PvE with the Killing Blow condition required, I don't think it'll be super popular for most group play stuff. Maybe certain 4-man encounters or solo encounters. Yeah, nothing too crazy here though. I don't really see it doing anything special for trials. And then Wrathful Strikes and Rejuvenator, these nodes now grant 205 weapon weapon and spell damage to their effects. I think Wrathful Strikes is definitely going to make its way into more builds than it previously did. And then they also unfortunately nerfed a bunch of the percent-based nodes as well that deal with buffing specific types of damage or reducing incoming damage from specific types. This will be felt a bit in the overall damage levels, but don't worry, it isn't anything too drastic. And last thing on the champion points, I did put together this flowchart that I'll be including with my builds to help you decide which champion points to slot for your damage dealer. The percents won't be perfectly consistent across every single build, but should be close enough to make a well-informed decision. And again, the video I mentioned earlier diving deeper into the champion points will be linked down in the description. All right, for the final section of this video, we'll just cover a few other miscellaneous changes that are relevant for combat. So for sword and shield users, Power Slam's passive Resentment now reduces the cost of your next Power Slam by up to 50% rather than increasing its damage by 33%. So no change to the base damage of Power Slam, but it doesn't get that special damage increase after you block an attack now. For Vampire, Blood Frenzy, you only need 5 stacks rather than 10 now to reach that total weapon and spell damage mark, and the total health cost of the skill was reduced by about 20% as well, so just a bit easier time to build that up quickly and less of a detriment to your health than before. For our Werewolf changes, Hircine's Fortitude morph now grants minor endurance and fortitude for 20 seconds after casting rather than a unique amount of health and stamina recovery for 6 seconds. The Hircine's Rage morph now also reduces the ability cost to 37 and increased the duration of the Major Berserk and extra damage taken to 10 seconds, up from 6 seconds. So a little bit easier to keep up that Major Berserk now, and not quite as crazy of a magicka cost for the heal as it was before. And then also relevant to werewolves, the Shapeshifter's Chain. This set now also reduces the cost of werewolf active abilities by 15% to help it stand up in power for all transformation ultimates. And then finally, the last change we'll cover is the most important change of the High Isle chapter. You now have the ability to choose which title music theme plays on the game's login screen. This is actually pretty cool. I definitely miss the old themes, and it'll be nice to set this back to the original for a bit and jam out to that. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully this helped sum up all of the main combat changes coming with High Isle in a more digestible format than digging through all the different sets of patch notes. I appreciate you stopping by and checking it out. Let me know what you think about the changes in the comments below. I want to give a big thanks to my current Patreon supporters and YouTube members. There are ways to help support the channel and keep these videos coming for as little as $3. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougar's Bay in the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, Blake1816, Mordecai1212, Santanico, Nalandia, Hey It's Spork, and my wonderful wife. Thanks again for stopping by. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.